Bismillah. Thank you all for being here for our April Unread Book Club. Unread because we don't have to come here have read the entire book because we will read some passages together. Um, but before we dive into it, maybe if we can take a minute or two to just allow ourselves to be here and be in this space together. So if you are in a safe place to close your eyes, feel free to do so, or maybe have them at soft gaze. And maybe you'll take a moment to have a few deep breaths. And with each breath, we're just allowing ourselves to relax deeper and deeper into that space that is the core of our being. Knowing that at that space, all of us here that are connected virtually share that same space together inwardly. And as we come out of that space, we bring it with us into this moment here, into this circle, this virtual discussion that we're about to get into. That as we dive deeper into that discussion, we're keeping that presence with us. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and be here. Alhamdulillah. Thank you all for being here. Hmm. This month has been April and working with this book has been something. Um, the I got introduced to this book by a friend of mine, Maya. She was I don't know where she was. She was out and about. I think maybe in Philly or close to Philly or something like that. And she went to a bookstore and she saw the entanglement, how art and philosophy make us what we are. And she picked it up and she was like, oh, she took a picture. She's like, Osama, gotta read this book. So She, she shared the book with me, and man, just even the title on its own did something for me. Um, the idea of entanglement, the idea of everything is pretty much like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. And how art and philosophy are embedded within that entanglement. Um, so I enjoyed reading it the first time around. And then when it came to making the list for this round for the book club, I was like, man, this is gonna be something. Um, but maybe we can a small little introduction about the author, Alva. I think I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Alva Noë, I guess. He's a philosopher of mind and perception. He's a professor and chair of philosophy at UC Berkeley, where he's also a member of the Institute for Cognitive and Brain Sciences. His central preoccupation across his career has been a deceptively simple question, which is pretty much across the maybe the main topic that we will go into today. And his simple question is, what is it to perceive? So he's going deeper into the idea of perception. His core argument is that consciousness is not something that happens inside of us, not in our brains or anywhere else, but something that we do. The idea runs directly through the chapter which we're going to be reading out of, which is chapter 6. Um, and The Entanglement, which was published in 2023, only 3 years ago, is his most recent book, and he currently is working on questions about love, AI, and um, picturality, which I don't really know what that is per se. But Alva Noë, to be honest, like I don't really didn't really know much about him before, and my only um, encounter with him is through this book, The Entanglement. So just before we dive in, before we open, I guess the discussion. Um, has anybody here read any of the book or any material in the book? Emily, Antoine. Okay, I'm curious to see what was the initial impression on the book, like what were yeah, initial impression of reading it. Yeah, Emily.
Okay. Yeah, I just popped on. I found it on Hoopla, like a couple hours before circling in, and my initial impression was I was feeling a call to the testament to each of our voices at this time to really let ourselves free because we need to be we need to like have each other's perception. We need to like break free of old perceptions and like break out of what has been holding us back and like get new ideas and trust that we are here to impact each other and that we will impact each other whether or not we're like standing fully in our truth or if we're not. So that was my first impression. I was like, ooh, I want to take a closer look. And then I hopped into the section on dancing,
Hmm.
and dancing is really important to me. I feel as though in all of our indigeneity, that we all come from indigenous land loving lands, that dance was like our spirit language and
Hmm.
connected to like ancestors, trees, love, life, everything. And like dance and everything, but dance is kind of like a pivotal point to perceive this phenomenon from that we become impacted. We get downloads. We get integrated. We get indoctrinated into what dance should look like. That it should be like sexy. It should look this way. That I'm doing this for you. And a lot of the ways that we've that's in our bones, like the way the dance lives in our bones, has been left out of the dance
Mm-hmm.
in our modernities and colonialities. So I think of like dance as kind of like a thermometer for truth
Mm,
in essence. And I'll just leave that there. That's been on my mind.
it's beautiful. And the yeah, thank you for that. Because when I read that section about dance and what he says, the difference between dance, quote unquote, regular dance, and capital D dance, right? When perception is fully opened and the move, yeah, it's not just a person is in just a flow state, but it's the epitome of the archetype of dance, capital D dance itself, right? And he was using that as an example for pretty much all different sorts of arts, but using the example of dance in particular and how ancient it is when it comes to human beings, right? Like in the history of what it means to be a human, right? And dance, capital D dance, um, is embedded within our makeup. That was really yeah, that was really interesting. So I'm glad that you brought that part up. I love that
Mm, thank you.
for sure. What about you, Antoine?
Wow, yeah, that's a great example. Thanks, bro. Beautiful example, Emily, of what you felt about it. I guess my first experience of the book was uh, I was a bit struggling with the way he was wording things and expressing things, and I noticed that as I was reading it, he sort of invites you into a different kind of listening and perception just from the word, or invited me into just from the way he languished his thoughts. I sort of struggled with what he was trying to say in the very beginning until I had this click that like exactly what he was talking about, in terms of like he mostly spoke about it in chapter 6, having an intention to listen to something differently, or
Hmm.
listen to it from a perspective that you haven't already been conditioned in, and how it's effortful listening, he called it. And a lot of times art is the thing that allows us to sort of break into a different level of perception, to see things differently and get a different kind of knowledge from it. Because
Hmm.
when I was first reading, it felt, um, I don't know, I was getting this generic feel from it, or like how he was describing things. Like he was saying one thing about what I would see as maybe paradigm blindness. So I would have used different terms, and I needed to hear what he was saying from the language that I understood it. And it seemed like he was making it more complicated than it had to be. And then a shift happened somewhere, when I was in the 6th chapter, and I realized that I was doing the very thing he was talking about, looking at the work from the lens that I was used to, which made it harder for me to assimilate the concepts and the ideas he was trying to bring across. Once that shift happened, it was like I was able to read what he was saying with a new lens. I could see the art and the wisdom in the prose that he was even writing. And it
Hmm.
became its own sort of generative break, or I guess that's how he described it. Or another word he used was ecstasis, a Greek term for
Oh,
stepping
ecstasy.
out. Say it again.
Yeah, yeah, like ecstasy, where ecstasy comes from, like out of
Yeah.
body.
Yeah,
No,
stepping outside yourself.
it's also an stasis. I mean, there's two versions of it, and they actually mean slightly different. Classically, ecstasy is a throwing out, whereas instacy is a grounding.
Mm,
Uh, I forget who coined the instacy version of the word,
Hmm.
but
Interesting.
but
That.
but yeah, you can see it. I mean, ecstasy, ecstasy, breathing in, breathing out. That's what the world's all about.
Hmm.
Sometimes you move, sometimes you're still. I did want to say though, as a species, we danced long before we ever spoke. Human beings genetically have been around for 100,000 years, and we've only had the blight of civilization for the last, 10,000 years. And we probably talked for maybe 40,000 years. What were we doing for that other 60,000 years of our supposed survival? Of course, we're killing each other off. It seems to be one of the things we seem to like to do. But who knows how many human beings who are out there, or variants on human beings that just never quite got assimilated into the tribe. We're the survivors,
Yeah.
and who knows how long we're going to survive.
Yeah. والله. Yeah. But to your point, Antoine, also that reading, you're experiencing the things that he was talking about in your reading. Hmm.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Ecstasis. Yeah. Get that.
Yeah. And really, I mean, it really helped to for us to go back and forth for a while, like really, um, going over what he was talking about with a fine tooth comb. When you and I was discussing it, I mean, we discussed this book for hours upon hours,
Hmm.
and I got to see both sides of, my very clear opinion in the very beginning, and then once I had that shift, being able to read these same words through a different lens, giving myself a different experience with it.
Hmm.
And with that different lens came new knowledge, which is
Hmm.
very interesting. Because I think that's exactly what he's pointing out in this whole book, this idea of epiphany or a generative break where new knowledge becomes available just from the expansion of perception or the
Hmm.
shift in perception or perspective. I'll
Hmm.
leave it there.
But isn't
Awesome.
isn't a lens basically a bias? I don't mean that in a negative way, negative or positive, but it is a bias either way, right? So then you kind of want to try on new lenses or break your lens. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Absolutely. And this is, I think, the part right now that I'm gonna share my screen. Um, this chapter, the aesthetic predicament, I think it's talking about that perception. Um, or really what you're talking about, David, the main thing of like shattering the lens or cha stepping away from that bias, as much as possible, at least recognizing that there is a bias to begin with, right? Um, yeah, so one of the things that stood out, maybe I'll read this whole paragraph because this last thing really stood out to me. He writes, the focus so far has been on art and the ways that art loops down and alters the habits and technologies that are its raw materials and its wellspring. But in fact, the entanglement runs deeper even than this. For the aesthetic predicament, or the aesthetic blind, as I will call it, is much more widespread and abiding than art and art making. It is as basic and as original as the fact of consciousness itself. The aesthetic is a live possibility, an opportunity, and a problem wherever we find ourselves. We, and the whole domain of our experience and our world, are no more scrutable than the artworks that we make. We are not fixed, stable, defined, and known. The very act of trying to bring ourselves, our consciousness, our worlds into focus reorganizes and changes us. We are an aesthetic phenomena. Like the fact that that last section, we are not fixed, stable, defined, and known. The very act of trying to bring ourselves, our consciousness, our world into focus reorganizes and changes us. We are an aesthetic phenomenon. I wonder how does this land for you guys? I mean, there's multiple layers here, but like, does it seem like it's something that's easy to agree with? Is it testable? Is it falsifiable? Um, yeah, Paul.
Uh, there's a, a, a Japanese, who's a Japanese uh, professor, lived in Canada when he was alive. Uh, Tesoro Itsetsu. He grew up. His father was a caretaker of a Zen monastery in Japan, and he grew up there um, before and during the war, World War II. He later became a professor of uh, Islamic uh, things, particularly Ibn Arabi. And he wrote a book which is popular. And I highly recommend it if you're interested, because he compares Ibn Arabi and he gives a reasonably very good, very sophisticated synopsis of the Fasus um, to Chang Tzu and Lao Tzu.
Oh, is it Sufism
And
and Taoism?
it's called uh, yeah, no, yeah, I think that's what I think this was called Sufism Taoism. Yeah, it was republished in by UC Berkeley. Published it.
Yeah, it's one of my
It's
favorite books. I love that book.
Yeah, it's a really good book. But the thing about it is that he and his wife wrote a book years before that, not as easily findable. But it specifically dealt with the experience of Japanese art based on with the absence of color, so they're basically just black and white drawings and illustration. And his whole thing was that uh, in that book was that uh, our consciousness is requires an aesthetic response, in as much as we have the sort of luminous consciousness, but we also have the embodied bodily consciousness of the heart that and that the aspects is that consciousness uh, isn't just a cognition of an understanding, an insight, a flash, an aha.
Mhm.
It's also aha. It's also a surrender,
Mhm.
and uh, and in some ways that surrender is the counterpoint. In the same way that nobody dances who isn't falling down. That's all. That's basically what dancing is it's having cute ways of not of falling down, but eventually we all fall down.
Mhm.
And so it is. So it is with this. So if anybody who doesn't know the Itsu's book, it's definitely worth a read. Actually, everything is his is worth a read. He had a semantic way of dealing with this. Is this kind of old-fashioned semantics. It's not as popular now, but if you're a poet, it's really interesting. It's semantics that was popular around 1950 to about 1962. And but he did more with it than most other people because for one thing he thought and he felt.
Hmm.
So his understanding of the semantics of the Quran is also really good. And all of his books now are being reissued. So they used to be out of print and hard to find, but they are getting back into print.
Amazing. Yeah, I would love to check it out. But this idea that you just shared of it's not just a cognition and it's not just um, moments of aha moments, but that surrender aspect of it, right? And it's I think maybe another section here we'll read more about that. But as far as this section, this idea of again, I think we return to it every once in a while, the effort and the effortless, right? Because here, even in what he's saying, just in this little bit here, the very act of trying to bring ourselves into focus, right? What does that even mean? To bring oneself into focus? To Is it some aspect of self-examination? And that this bringing oneself into focus in itself, does that change the material of which is being brought to focus? You know what I mean? Um, I see Antoine excited about that sentence. Um, but on a practical level, on a day-to-day level, for somebody to say, or for somebody to try to bring their selves or their consciousness or their world into focus, you know, what does that mean? What does that mean to bring oneself into focus, one world into focus?
I can give you my take. I don't
Yeah.
know how. And this is just kind of coming for where my personal research has been lately. But with regards to art, and then the idea of bringing oneself into focus, art, whether it's dance or music. I use music because that's the main sort of art form that I've followed for most of my life, and dance to some degree. I don't personally dance, but I played for a lot of dancers over the years. Um, and in terms of bringing yourself into focus, well, I see like a couple different things that could potentially have meaning there. For one, you can have art that breaks meaning for you. And what I mean is you look at it and you can't identify something that necessarily makes sense or that you can, identify with.
Hmm.
And what happens is there's almost a period of death that occurs. And then there's a resemblance where you're sort of trying to identify with something that rings within you. And so, in a sense, you're trying to find yourself again
Hmm.
through something that's like familiar, relatable. And so, with music, that's very easy because music's laid over time and time's
Hmm.
very relatable. And
Hmm.
dance has form. forms are relatable. There's only so many forms you can witness, right? Um, with something like art, it's a little more difficult because yes, there's form, there's all these components, but there's some ways of manipulating it that goes beyond the physical structure of the body, the use of sound. I mean, if you take something like, one of John Coltrane's later works or Roscoe Mitchell,
Yeah.
Ohm, his album Ohm, which just, I mean, I remember listening to that when I was 13 years old. What the fuck? Okay, this is like an hour long, dude. And
Yeah.
then some years later, hearing it again and just sitting with it, you know, not necessarily understanding, but just being like, okay, I'm gonna like, sort of let this wash over me.
Yeah.
And still, you can observe the mind trying to adhere to something. Because when the rug is pulled out from under your feet, you're trying to grab for something familiar or something that gives you a sense of stability,
Mhm.
which is your notion of self. Um,
Yeah.
with music, it was always like an interesting thing for me because I was always interested in listening to this weird, very obscure things, and I, mostly not American based, something from some jungle somewhere or some other country, and the sound was so odd and just sort of out of context for my aesthetic,
Right.
right? That I'm like, damn, some people are listening to this and it's giving them this profound meaning. And
Hmm.
to me, it's almost upsetting. And I want to change that. I want to understand how to not be upset by this.
Hmm.
So I want to know what's going on. So, in a way, kind of like, rather than sort of just letting it occur, I'm just sort of like, well, all right, I'm having this reaction and I want to sort of counter that reaction with something. So, in that way, I'm sort of broadening my aesthetic.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And expanding my sense of self. So that's how I see like art can like work in these two ways, maybe
Yeah.
more, just for this for what I'm saying, like these two ways, where in one way it can work to sort of totally dismantle
Hmm.
everything, and then you're just left with sort of raw experience and just experience, and your awareness of that experience, or it creates this sort of impetus to either accept or reject. And then if you're accepting it, you're trying to understand it.
Yeah.
Why, what's going on here? I want to know more. I want to know more about this language. What are they saying here?
Hmm.
And what's really fascinating that I learned over the years is like even the most odd sounding thing can become one of the most beautiful things when
Right.
you gain knowledge
Right.
of, of the meaning behind it.
Yeah.
So in
And
terms of like, the arising, let me go back to the sense we are fixed, stable, defined, or known, and known, the very act of trying to bring ourselves, our consciousness, our worlds into focus recognizes and changes us. Right? So we are an aesthetic phenomenon.
yeah.
And I love that last words, we're a phenomenon rather than like a solidified thing,
Right.
right? It's like an act. It's
Hmm.
a doing.
Yeah. And I think somewhere also he says it's like it's a happening or it's a constant thing that's going on. But I loved how you approach this from these two ways of what it means to go into focus. One of like, okay, after. this idea of awestruck, like the rug is, you know, is swept from underneath you, and now in order to bring it into focus, now it's trying to find that language. And the other flip side to it, or maybe not flip side to it, but maybe another approach or another happening of it can be in the that experience if it's like, oh, wait a second, it doesn't resonate right away. So in order to bring myself into focus with it, I would have to deal with something internally. I would have to adjust. There would have to be some kind of adjustments internally within my inner being, which I
That's
would
basically what
relate.
Antoine was saying too.
Wait, say that again?
Wasn't that basically what Antoine was saying with regards to what, like, as he was reading it,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
oh,
Exactly.
what's up
And
there? Like all of a sudden he sort of like had a change in perspective, and then it allowed him to
right,
tune into
right.
the flow and the artistic, expression happening within the writing.
100%, 100%. And and that's also where maybe I think what Paul was saying earlier about surrender, there's an aspect of surrender to that. Um, Somewhere in between, actually, I feel like it both in the death part, in the first part, and in the second part, when, you know, in order to engage with it, um, something gotta give in order to engage.
But the
Yeah.
meaning making part, I don't know that I'd call that surrender. I think yes, there is like a sort of initial surrender, but then like our little like monkey mind kicks in again, you know,
Hmm.
and I don't think the meaning making is necessarily negative, but it is self-reaffirming in
Hmm.
a sense, right? Like myself is getting bigger. Now I understand, Carnatic music of South India because I spent some months learning about it or something, right? Or, whatever. Now I can like read Kant because I struggled with that for months. Now I finally get his flow and his syntax and all this stuff. And now I have my little badge that I
Well,
can understand,
I
right?
think that I think the surrender, that's a good point. That's a good point. I think the surrender, there's a subtle point where the surrender takes place that allows the individual to even take the step to go into to try to figure out, right? So it's like, okay, let's say I listen to um, I don't know, Persian music, classical Persian music. Somebody's playing the Persian sitar, and I hear it first time, and I'm like, nah, it doesn't resonate. It's like I don't know what it like, I don't know what these notes are. I don't know what the tonality is, the quarter of a quarter. I don't know. It just doesn't resonate. I don't get any kind of um there is a reaction, but that reaction is not a positive reaction, right? And I am quote unquote turned off, meaning I don't even engage with it. That's the extent of my engagement with that art or with that music. But in order to go a step further, that's I think no, maybe the language, I don't know if it would be quote unquote considered surrender, but uh, there's a moment where it's like, okay, this is intriguing enough that I'm willing to let go of this uncomfort that I felt initially in order to pursue what this sound is, or as you said, for it to allow it to wash over me, like really for me to actually receive it, um, and see the knowledge that it wants to tell me beyond this is the melody and these are the notes and this is the scale that the musician was playing it, but really the the knowledge, the actual lineage and heritage of which these scales and modes and maqams that we're playing on. And that point kind of almost like a crossing a threshold in order to allow oneself to go into that. At least that's how I understood that surrender of maybe what Paul was talking about. Now, maybe the word, I don't know if the word is the right word, if that's the true meaning of it, but it's the moment in time that allows for that happening to take place inwardly in order to be able to receive art, music, the world really, um, from that perspective or within that kind of perception.
Hey, bro,
Mm.
just jumping in just to let you know there's a comment for you.
Oh, uh, where you want to read it?
Sure. Jared asks you, where does vulnerability come into play that surrender, Osama?
Where does vulnerability come into play? Oh,
I, I'd say vulnerability is completely and totally like being willing to be vulnerable is exactly what we're talking about, right?
right.
Because closing off, I'm sure if Pete Hegseth heard some Persian music, he's not going to like all of a sudden think, oh, these people have culture and maybe I shouldn't be bombing them to hell. That's being invulnerable, right? Whereas like another person who's, oh, this is interesting. This is drawing me in, and now it's making me want to explore this more it requires vulnerability
Hmm.
to to allow to surrender. Like you absolutely have to be able to be vulnerable. I
Yeah,
You know, I
absolutely.
was, oh,
Yeah, let me jump in real quick for that, and then I see Antoine and Paul. Um, where does vulnerability come into that surrender? I think um,
Well,
like
it can come, it
allowing.
can,
Oh, just give me one
either.
second, Paul. Allowing oneself to experience whatever it is in like bare, right? Like whether it's in a state of I don't know, um, in a state of or in a state of submission to the unknown, or in a state of um, receptivity. I think all of these things, these words kind of come together within that vulnerability of like pretty much what David was saying, like wash over me, like just to allow for something to wash over you is a state of vulnerability, I think, right? When it comes to um meaning it's not fixed, it's not stable, it's not defined and fully known. It's a constant phenomenon, it's a constant thing that is taking place. So even within myself, when I'm within that experience, whether it's music or life in general, if I'm in that state, then the, the perception is my perception is now directing that experience that I'm having, um, which yeah requires that state of vulnerability. It's embedded within it, I feel like. Yeah, Paul, sorry I cut you off.
Well, I don't know. I think I'm blowing my own horn here, but I wanted to share briefly the themes we're talking about. I just completed a 30-page essay dealing with them called "The Pearl and the Blade," which I'm just going to read a tiny section of. The end of my introduction, I say to read the book of Obsceity is to let the heart become an oyster. To read it with dohas is to let the pearl form. The Dohas, by the way, are a two-line uh, poetic form that comes out of North India. Kabir is probably the one that most people might be familiar with. But I'm going to read just a couple of the things. This is the Doha that opens it. This is not part of it, but it opens the work and closes it in a different way. A silence waits at the first line without waiting for a reader. And in that waiting, it's clear reading begins in the one breath. And then the opening for the Kitab Huwa. Kitab Huwa is in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. To him alone I place my trust, and upon him alone I rely. Praise belongs to God, and that is enough. And peace be upon his servants whom he has chosen. Uh, my Doha. My mother says the heart begins where conclusions pause. The heart stands where certainty falters. And some mornings the standing happens first, and the certainty arrives later, grateful to be included. And then the actual kitab begins with the singular one, without the quality of singularity, is not composed of a name and a named object, for his name is he, and the one named is he, and there is no name but his, and no named but him. Thus he is both the name and the named. And my doha to that is, my father says the breath begins where the mind stops asking why. In some evenings, the breath arrives first, and the mind follows after, relieved to be carried.
Mhm.
Uh, by the way, since I'm sensitive to language, he, by the way, in the is the uh, who is who in Arabic, and it means the ipseity. So it's the essence about which we really can't say anything. And though it the translation works best using the pronoun he, even though some people might figure that I'm talking about a man. I try to dissuade people of those reactions in my introduction.
Mm.
So the reason I wanted to share a little bit of that with you is, as I said, I've been this dynamic of uh, art in life and where they meet and the aesthetic. And for lots of people who are not religious, the pursuit of beauty can be something that they can uh, find deeper, uh, even a hope for transcendence, and if only for a moment. Uh, but and the uh, a love in the classic mode is always there to seek beauty, and it's not to seek beauty as some kind of objective norm, but when you love, there will be no place that you don't see the beautiful,
Mhm.
and uh, and uh, and in a highly redemptive sense of release from our judgments or from our understandings of things. So I just thought I'd share a little bit of that with you.
I love that. Thank you for
That
always,
was really nice.
always with the fire writings and somehow connecting, with these sections that are already highlighted into into this discussion. right? Because even when you're reading from it, the named and the name and that singular reality and that movement within that singular reality. Um, and here I highlighted something where he says that aesthetics is not the task of evaluating the object, it is the task of achieving the object. Aesthetic experience names the work of achieving the object. It reminded me of what you just said about the named and the name and um, love and achieving beauty, but love itself, everything just becomes, you're seeking beauty, but everything beautifies through it. Um, it's really interesting sometimes when I think about these things to bring them into the most practical sense, right? Like what does this look like in the most practical sense? What does it mean? Even here in the end when he said generally aesthetic experience is the work of recognition, reorganization in the face of the not yet known. Like how do these things show up within the idea of perception and how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive reality in a day-to-day, so that it's not just, oh, okay, um, I'm having an experience and I'm not just I'm not just listening to this music, or I'm not just experiencing this experience that's happening to me, but in that moment of full receptivity of perception that is constantly open, that music, I achieve the music itself. I achieve the object of which I'm being washed. I'm using that example that they give because it's such a beautiful thing. I've become that which, um, the object of which I'm quote unquote observing or achieving. Yeah, Antoine.
Beautifully expressed, all of you. Paul, Sama, David. Um, yeah, yeah, like right here in this idea, building up to this, I think that maybe, I'm critiquing it based on what I've read, right? He could have maybe done, well, I don't know. I was going to say there could be a greater distinction made between thoughts and perception and thoughts and awareness.
Hmm.
Because have an aesthetic experience, he said, names the work of achieving the object. But what does that mean, right? Like for any person who can read that, if you're not careful and like really aware of the nuance, you could think, oh, achieving the object means I'm thinking about it in a different way. I see it differently. I look and have a different perspective on it. And I think seeing it a different way, looking and having a different perspective on the object is a function of having achieved the object. But what is achieving the object? And I think that has something closer to do with what he's using or how he's using the term art and beauty and aesthetics. I think he's sort of merged this idea of art and sort of he's looking at it as a technology of transcendence.
Hmm.
And when I say that, I mean like he's he's trying to orient us to exactly what art is doing to our nervous system that sneaks past our thought life.
Hmm.
And his idea is if we sneak past this thought life often enough that we will build the capacity of awareness to be aware of our awareness moving beyond thought life. And if this awareness through art or through this being an aesthetic phenomenon, being aware of it happening as it's happening, the capacity to hold um, subject and object simultaneously is expanded. When I hear him say achieve the object, this is what I think of. I think the object thus becomes a subjective experience simultaneously.
Hmm.
There is awareness of myself in the object, but at the same time, I am that. I know the deepest sense of that beauty or object is none other than myself. But in order to experience that, it can't be mental conjecture or conceptualization. It has to actually be a result of the refinement of perception and of the nervous system being able to hold two as one, subject and object, which is an actual developmental thing of the nervous system rather than just intellectual conceptualization.
Thank you. I love that.
Antoine, could I? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
cool. Okay, all right. Because I just got in my car. I was able. I can just say something real quick. Or it, Antoine, just okay. Well, sorry, I'm a little frazzled, just kind of getting in my car and everything. But um, if I could just offer to bring some a sense of concreteness, I think to the collectiveness of this conversation. Um, so I'm a psychotherapist. Is everyone aware of the show Shrinking? Shrinking on Apple Plus with Harrison Ford and Jason Segel.
Yeah.
Anyone know that show?
I'm aware of it. Yeah.
So I remember when that show came out, I was in grad school, and I remember and I was in my clinical internship, and so I was doing sessions with clients, patients, and I remember watching that show and being really taken with it because I was like, that's the kind of therapist I want to be. Now, if you know the show, there's a lot of really kind of fucked up ethical stuff that happens, but there was a core where Jason Segel as a therapist he was being so honest and so blunt and so direct in with his clients, and he was really cutting through a lot of mental detritus with them and getting to really hard truths, and he did that in the show because he kind of lost sense of his own boundaries. But my point being, I watched that and I thought, that's who I want to be
Right.
as a therapist. And so, Antoine, when you were just saying, when you were just investigating, what does it mean to like achieve the object of art? A television show is a form of art, as an entertainment kind of art. And the object that I was achieving, whether it was the artist's intent or not, as the subject, as the audience member, I saw that and I went, that has a very material consequence in my life. I see this representation of a therapist, and I want to act in that way. So I allowed it to inspire me, but it required me to first acknowledge saying that I'm not doing in my real specific life and real life examples and memories that I have, I'm not doing the thing that I see represented in this piece of art. And so I feel a distance, I feel a gap between where I am and where the representation of what this or what this art is representing as an ideal is. And so I thought, how do I get there? How do I had to be vulnerable. I had to be uncomfortable and acknowledge that, I'm not where I want to be. I'm here and that piece of art is representing someone over there. How do I get there?
Hmm.
The process of that and the success that I had of the success or not that I had of getting there is very much besides the point. But just the idea of because Osama, you were asking like, what's the practicality of a lot of these concepts in the book that we're talking about? And Antoine, you're saying with achieving an object, it just made that example just came to mind as a way of a very, at least in my mind, a very concrete, very specific, non-abstract
Hmm.
way of kind of communicating these ideas.
Yeah. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's um yeah, the idea of engaging with that art, whatever medium it is, and um seeing it and having because I know exactly what you're talking about, Jared. I watched the show. I love the show. Matter of fact, it's like it's yeah, it's an amazing show. And the way that he does therapy is like completely out of the box, right? Cross so many boundaries and stuff like that. But for I can imagine for somebody within that field, that's like it creates something internally or it meets something internally within that individual that is beyond just inspiration. It's like, oh, I'm inspired to be like that. But something internally is shifting in order to allow for that archetype or for that being or for that object to be achieved and or being moved towards that object in its achievement. That is not mere psychology, I guess, of what Antoine is saying of just inspiration or just something in thought, but more actually maybe or maybe more psychologically deeper or whatever it is.
Well,
However,
Osama, it's discomfort, right? Like
right,
that's what I see you point to. Discomfort is a physical reality. It's not
right,
just a psychological one. Discomfort exists as a, according like to the Vedic definition of consciousness, mind and body. It exists as if in a physical form, and it has a cognitive correlate to it. But so that shifting is the awareness of I'm uncomfortable right now. I don't, you know, as human beings, we're not supposed to like the feeling of discomfort. When we feel a kind of discomfort, we're evolutionarily motivated to resolve the discomfort. And so that movement that you're referring to is that impulse to resolve a discomfort,
right.
as I'm hearing it.
Hmm. And hopefully in achieving the object rather than falling back into well, I get maybe that becomes more of a psychological question, but that movement, because that movement is now in whatever which direction, right? Because it can go back, revert
Yes.
back to itself and go back into like, or it can continually to be at a greater height of or levels of discomfort that now become more baseline, and that baseline starts to increase and increase.
Well,
Um,
you're right that I can revert back onto that discomfort in almost a regressive way, which would, in a psychological sense, be the onset of depression.
right.
Or I could sit with that discomfort and find it as progressive and use it as a kind of, nonetheless, a little bit of anxiety, but a motivational kind of anxiety or impetus to change my present circumstances.
Hmm.
But depending upon, very much your point, depending upon the direction that I move with that discomfort, could result in a depressive, stagnant state, a kind of rumination, high energy, frantic, anxious state, or a kind of energetic, progressive, motivational state.
Right, right. Mm.
I want to
The,
jump in and just say, like, so what you guys are saying, and I don't disagree with anything anyone's saying, but I disagree with the premise of the statement that this says right here: the aesthetic experience is the work of achieving the object, work that is the antecedent to any act of explicit evaluation of the object. Aesthetics is not the task of evaluating the object. I totally disagree with that.
Hmm.
Aesthetics is the very fact of evaluating an object. That's what makes it an aesthetic, right? Like the
Hmm.
evaluation of it. Um, and so,
actually,
so hold on. And so, what I'd like to say is, what we're talking about is transcendence with a small t, right? Which is more like the idea of expanding perception.
Hmm.
But that's not transcendence. That's just widening the scope of understanding of objects, of meanings, right? You
Hmm.
know, it's like the allegory of the cave. The guy got free, walked out into the world, and said, holy crap, these guys have no idea. And then he goes back and try to explain things like you're crazy.
Hmm.
Whereas achieving the object is not necessarily coming to understanding a broader meaning of the object. Achieving the object is just object in and of itself. What is What is an object without evaluation?
Uh, it's
Are you going
interesting.
to answer the question? Because I'd like an answer to that
Well,
question.
yeah, well, the thing about it is you're stuck in one pole, you know.
What pull is
It's
that?
not about you're standing somewhere and you're looking at an object. What is looking at an object? Actually, if the statement that say page 106, just the paragraph following, it says art participates in the aesthetic, but aesthetic in general feature of our lives together in the world. Then it goes on to say, but things are actually more complicated still. For it turns out, as we'd explored in chapters 9 and 10, that what we're doing is we're trying to make judgments about works, judgments that are this is and this is not a great work. This is kind of I think what you were just saying is really just a kind of veil, the way of working to see them more clearly or to bring them into focus. Wittgenstein had this in mind when he said that in aesthetics, what matters is not whether you like a work, but why. Why do you respond as you do? Now you're in a bipolar way because if you're asking why, you're between the object and yourself and the wonder. So instead of saying,
So that was what I was talking about way at the beginning of the conversation, right? Where it was
and
like,
then it goes
so I
on,
see this
then it goes on.
object. So hold on, because you kind of cut me off. So I want to like continue this train of thought. So
Hmm.
when we see an object, and then we start to ask, why am I reacting in this way, right? So that's sort of like what I'm calling transcendent with a small t, right? Because it's still this binary. There's a subject and object. It's not transcending the subject and object relationship. So that's not transcendence with a capital T, where you see an object and allow it to exist in and of itself, as if your mind is just a mirror reflecting the object in its pure state. That's transcendence, according to me, and according to
You're
people I've
talking about
studied.
capital T then. You're talking about
Capital T,
capital T.
right? Right. Where so
Okay.
it's like your pure awareness is allowing the object to just be is beheld, right? With all of its potentiality happening at the exact same time, so therefore nothing almost. It's almost empty because it's everything.
Yeah.
Because your biases are no longer sort of jumping in the way of what is witnessing.
Hmm.
Anyway, sorry, I'm getting
Thing about it is that in the experience of awareness, it's always perceptual. It's never non-perceptual. If it's non-perceptual, then it's not an experience.
sure.
So we have to. So in other words, it's not like we have uh, little t or capital T intensities of awareness. It's rather we are always in a mixed alloy. It's sort of like golden nature is always mixed up with a bunch of other rocks that are and is embedded in quartz. So it
Well, I was going
is.
to say, I
So
feel like
so it
that's what
is.
he does in this writing is he dances around sort of this like constantly layering, where there's like this idea of sort of objectless transcendence mixed in with
Hmm.
objectified transcendence, where it's like, I'm having a hard time putting words to it, but
Yeah.
I struggle with using the word aesthetic. That's all I'm saying
Right.
because of its meaning. And it's odd that and the problem is I didn't read the book, and he has probably gone to great lengths to really provide a definition for what he means by aesthetic, right? And if I read the book, I might have a completely different opinion on how he's using the word here. But I struggle with that because an aesthetic analysis, it is analysis.
Well, that's the
You
thing.
know,
I think that's to Antoine's point earlier about the reading, his experience of reading the book, even though he read the book, is very similar to what you're describing right now, David, as far as like, the use of language or one. I think what he did really well in this book is showcase the entanglement of it, which is the main thing, right? Is like you go in it from this direction, you get slippery slope, you go in from that direction, it's slippery, you go from this, and everything is just super, super entangled. Um,
yeah, it gives me my work.
but no, I'm with you. I'm with you with that. And
Get to
even
go and explore what does it mean to be aesthetic,
mhm.
now I'm gonna ponder that for a while.
Yeah, and to I remember reading or not reading. I remember one time I was on a boat in Switzerland in Lake Luzerne, and the water was moving in such a way, the sky, the blueness of the sky, the clouds that were just exquisite. It was just beautiful. The scene was insane. And my body in that moment responded with crying. That was the main response, almost involuntarily, that my body responded with. And in that sense, I understand that achieving the object in that moment, which I found out later that there's a term for that experience, which is called aesthetic arrest, where your entire perception, your entire being is arrested through the aesthetic, pretty much achieving the object, right? It just becomes in such a um it's so simultaneous, it's so boom boom. There isn't even a space for evaluating anymore. There isn't a space for even providing value, or even a piece of music that just comes in and like right away it's just intense, right?
But don't you think the aesthetic like very quickly comes in, right? So like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about because it brought me to like one day when I walked onto a beach in California and it was like the smell, the sound, the view, everything hitting at once. And there was this moment of no no interaction.
Yeah.
Oh, the smell, oh, salty taste. Like what Paul was kind of saying, where it was like ah and ah, you know, where it's like this release, but then it's to sort of like come back together. Um, yeah, I mean, I was kind of talking about that before too, where it's just this like moment, it's almost like a moment of death,
Mhm.
where just your sense of you is just gone. You're just in this,
Right,
kind of like laid into the whole tapestry of everything.
right,
And then all of a sudden, like, oh, that's there, and that's there, and that's there, and that's there, right?
right, right.
But that's beautiful too, and that's like, and then you like have this remembrance
Mm.
of that experience, and then
Yeah.
you try to get back
Reference points.
there.
Reference points. Antoine.
Yo, yo. Before I speak, I know we only have a few minutes left. Paul, did you finish that point you were making?
Well, it was actually all I was doing was reading what the author was going to say. So, uh, uh, so what are the reasons? It says the activity of doing this, which is at this turn suggests the work of aesthetics that you need to undertake is that of describing what you see and finding the words to say what you've noticed and find. Actually, those are moving away from the aesthetic in terms of the arrest. The activity of doing this, attempting to survey, describe, evaluate, is fragile, incomplete, tentative. It is also productive of this sense, the act of thinking, looking, talking. So what you see changes what you know and see, and after this labor, how can you finally see? So in other words, the dance of perception. If you can evoke the feeling, the emotion, the sense of beauty, and be moved by it, your act of thinking and looking is doesn't fall down in the same old categories, but rather is freed, and like all freedom, it also has places of balance, habitual things that make us feel comfortable. But we move out from that. We go back to that. We go, this is that rhythm. Breathing is the simplicity of it. Breathing is so similar, and every breath is absolutely unique and profound, and totally encases the big T and the
Mhm.
little t at the same time. And it's the breathing. That thought is a extension of breathing. So are the various ways we feel. So it's all. Um, but as I said, I'm still in the after thrall of working on this essay that I spent, I don't know, about 4 months working on. Finally, more or less, it's more or less completed now, which is nice. And
Looking forward
even
to
I,
when you get to share it
huh?
with us. I said, looking
I
forward
already
to when you get to share it.
said I
It's okay.
already did share.
Oh, the part that you read to us. It's okay for me to jump in a little bit before we cut
Yeah,
out.
go ahead.
Thank you for sharing, all of you. Osama, um, you said something to me a few days ago that reminded me of what this what the writer was trying to say, that made me relate to what he was saying as aesthetic arrest or aesthetic phenomenon, or what he's pointing at. I kind of started to see it as witnessing. You mentioned on Monday, I think it was, there was a time when you were playing the drum and you said you were just gone, but you were still playing the drum.
Mhm.
Would you associate that experience with achieving the object? If the object was the playing of the drum, or if the object was zikr, and maybe speaking a little bit about that, you can then close us out. What was your experience and how would you relate it to this?
Would I explain that as achieving the object if the object is the drum or the object is the chant? Um, I would say that, yeah, in that particular moment, um, which is, yeah, actually very interesting. I'm glad that you brought that up because uh, any other time that it is not, there isn't that singularity of experience of everything happening all at the same time, the drumming, the chanting, um, the rhythm, the movement, all of it. It becomes all in the task become achieving that, right? Um, Meaning like lifting the veils or lifting whatever obscured, whatever it is that stops me from that. But it's almost like a constant knocking. The achieving is almost like a knocking for that to happen, right? because it kind of happens not not through my will, but it is, right? Like this balance, right? Like I'm actively, quote unquote, the task is to achieve it, but when it happens, I haven't achieved it. It almost the object achieved me in a sense. Um, so I would describe it as that. Yeah, I would describe that moment of just being lost in the act itself or in the object, or as David said, it's almost like a death where the the ideas, there's nothing in that moment other than the moment itself, other than the drum itself, other than the object itself that's taking place. And even with the dhikr or with the chanting, it becomes, yeah, the chant becomes the name and the named become one, right? Um, so I would agree with that as far as you using this language to describe that phenomena um, of the task of achieving the object, and it's not in that sense. Now, I don't know if I would call that an aesthetic phenomena, but maybe it is in the sense of perception. Um, and in that sense, then the questions of evaluating and stuff like that start to fade away in that moment. There's no there's no evaluation that's taking place, or if um yeah, things just become relational in that moment. But that's the best way to describe that. And I'm pretty sure that anybody who experienced maybe moments of where they're playing music and just being completely, your eyes are closed or whatever, and you're like completely gone, completely, that's what I was telling Antoine. I'm like, yo, I was out. Like, if I didn't open my eyes for a moment just to check on the time, it was gone. Um, so yeah, I'm pretty sure, people kind of have similar experiences like that, whether it's playing music or making art or dancing or whatever it is, that the object itself, the capital D dance was achieved, or the capital drum, act is achieved, or music or whatever it is. Um, yeah. So I don't know if that is that what you wanted to talk about?
100%. I was
Mhm.
just, thank you for expressing it so beautifully. I was just saying in the comments, based on what you said, based on what David was saying, based on what Paul was saying, I think this is the little T for transcendence and the big T that people are speaking to. This is the witnessing. This is what I think Noe or no Alva is pointing to in terms of a generative break, what he's pointing to in terms of achieving the object, or like you said, the object achieved you. This idea of perception expanding beyond the doing,
Mhm.
um, from the moment. Like you say in Sufism, a child of the moment. All
Mhm.
these things, all these mystics and philosophers are pointing at this similar thing, this similar state that is possible in the human nervous system, or in relationship with the beloved, however you call it. But it's saying that these nervous systems have the capacity to be so much more of what they already are, and
Mhm.
that we get to play a conscious role in acting that in our experience.
Mhm.
And we can use technologies of consciousness to do so. And he believes, and I guess I'm more and more in agreement with him, that art can be and is an always ever present technology of transcendence or consciousness.
Mhm. Indeed. Indeed. Thank you, bro. It's a good place to to get this to a wrap. Um, yeah, alhamdulillah. We went a little over time, but it's all worth it. Thank God. Appreciate y'all very much for everybody
Okay.
who came on this live.
David, Paul, yeah. Osama,
Mhm.
Yep.
M.
Yes, yes. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. And um yeah, hopefully this conversation or this idea of perception, moving from not seeing to seeing or moving from seeing to seeing differently kind of sticks with us in us realizing whatever habits that we have, whatever conditioning, why we see things a certain way, why we do things a certain way, and maybe experiencing ways of which that perception is expanded and or we are in a state of receptivity to whatever that moment is allowing us to experience. God willing, all through the grace of God. And yeah, we will send new information for May's book club soon coming up. That's going to be Antoine's selection. And we'll put up this for a replay and we'll catch you soon, God willing. So much love.